all of the president's really vacillating and erratic public pronouncements and utterances make a lot more sense in light of the 3.3 million jobless claims that we saw this morning.
Yeah, look, he is looking at an economic collapse. And it's not only is it politically difficult for him, this is the one strong card he was bringing in to this reelection campaign. It's also, something that has affected many people in a way that even coronavirus hasn't, right? Coronavirus has affected now tens and tens of thousands of Americans, but the shutdown so far has affected millions. And so, of course, that tug and pull and tug would affect any president trying to find the right balance between all the different lives that are being thrown into turmoil as a result here. Now, all the public health experts say this is a short-term pain economically, as bad as it might be. You need to go through this in order to make sure you actually, get to the other side on the healthcare crisis. Otherwise, you're going to be doing it all over again. But you can certainly see the president looking at those numbers today and feeling like this is unsustainable from his point of view.
David, you make a point that seems to elude the president sometimes, that Peter Baker also just made, that the economic recovery is tied to our recovery from the pandemic. You write today, whatever happens over the next week or two, the country still has no viable way to start functioning normally again without a huge increase in testing. Even if new cases slow, the return of typical activity will cause new outbreaks. This is where I don't understand the pig-headedness on Trump's part. If the goal is to turn the switch back on the economy, there are some models in South Korea and China. There was testing every 2 hours, so you could have a clean universe of people to send back into offices or workplaces. Those things don't even seem to be on the table.
I think that's exactly right, Nicole. And I think there's a really good chance that he's not operating in his own best political interests, even setting apart what the interests of the country are that he is the leader of. And so we could really see a situation in which we come back too soon, or we have people circulating out in the world sporadically, like we see now across much of the South, which makes the economic pain as well as the human toll much, much worse. And I just don't see any way that there is an easy solution to this. And the president seems to be wanting an easy solution and thinking he can will that into being, but it's extremely unlikely that he can.
You know, Peter Baker, it's the right point, and it's the only logical conclusion. He's going to flip this switch on, it would appear, based on just the public pronouncements and the dynamics that we can all see when we watch these briefings, before a point where the isolation has done what it needs to do, which is to sort of put out wildfires. Not that he's very good at that either. But what is sort of the thinking inside the White House? Is it, pandemic be damned, we've got to get people back to work?
Well, look, this is a president, as you know, Nicole, who thinks in very short-term bursts, right? He lives for the moment. He's not a long-term thinker. And so he has been frustrated these last few days looking at indicators like the ones that came out today on the jobless claims. And he's frustrated and wants to be able to move on. The thing he did by using Easter as his target the other day was actually kind of extend it a little bit further. Remember, originally it was a 15-day period, which would expire, I think, at the end of this weekend, early next week. In effect, by making Easter, he kind of extended out just a little bit further. The question will be, in that period between now and then, are the numbers so dire as some of the experts predict they will be? Is the situation of these hospitals so overwhelming that, in fact, it will be very hard for him actually to do what he says he wants to do? Will he be, convinced otherwise by the Dr. Fauci's of the world? And we'll see. But I think that, if we really are peaking in mid-April, it will make it much harder. And we've already seen a number of governors who are the ones who actually execute these orders, including Republican governors like Larry Hogan of Maryland, say, no, we're moving our return to normal date out even further. They're not listening to the president's Easter deadline at this point. But you can see why that would have impact in states that haven't been as aggressive, particularly, as David said, in the South and other places where there's been, a more lax attitude toward it.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.